and also to welcome our four candidates. You probably know all of them, but in case you don't, I'll just, people will introduce themselves properly in a few minutes, but just to let you know who's here. We've got myself, I'm Sally Wainwright. I'm going to be chairing this on behalf of Brexit Scotland. Tommy Shepherd from the SNP on my right, or on your left, depending on your point of view. Sheila Gilmore from the Labour Party. Pat Black, who actually isn't standing in this constituency. The Green candidate in this constituency, as many of you know, is Peter McCall, but he'd already accepted an invitation to an alternative Hustings when we asked him to come here. We weren't quite quick enough. So Pat, who's standing at Edinburgh West, Pat's a candidate in Edinburgh West and has kindly agreed to come along in Peter's place. So you can just pretend that she's Peter.
We're doing all of that.
And on my far left, Aisha Salim from the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition.
Yes.
Right, excellent. So the format for tonight is that I'm going to invite each of the candidates to give a 5-minute introduction about themselves in whatever way that they want. And then we'll throw it open for questions from the floor. We're also being filmed, and it's being live streamed by Democracy TV, hence the slight delay at the beginning. And hopefully live or online viewers will be able to participate in the discussion using the chat facility. So if you're watching live viewers, when we come to the question times, don't forget to ask questions. There's also apologies from the Liberal Democrat candidate who unfortunately was out of town today. And finally, we will aim to finish between 8:30 and 8:45, just so you know if that's okay with everybody. So without further ado, I shall start over here and we'll just work this way. So Tommy, do you want to start?
Sure.
Can I, I'm sorry, this mic's not ideal. Can you just hand it to people?
Sally, will you give me a...
For the live streaming, I will...
Will you give me a prod when I'm getting near time?
I will, yes.
Do I have to use the mic for the streaming?
You do, yes. Yes, I'm afraid you do. You can take it out if you don't need it, but it's easy to take it out later.
Oh, I wasn't going to use the mic, to be honest, in this size. But anyway, hello everyone, and well done for coming here. This is the first of the hustings we had in Edinburgh East, and congratulations to Rick for organising it. My agent told me before I came tonight that really nobody changes their mind at hustings anyway. Everyone that comes has already pretty much made up their mind on what they're going to do. So I should actually be out knocking on doors and speaking to people who are undecided rather than having a discussion like this. But I love it, so I've come along anyway. I think there should be more events like this, and I think it's a shame actually there are so few of them these days. And particularly when you look at the debates that we had almost on every street corner during the referendum campaign, this country came alive politically, and I think it's great that we should try and continue that tradition. It is indeed during the referendum campaign that I wanted to start, because funny enough, Sheila and I used to be in the same branch Labour Party some decades ago, and that is my tradition, if you like. That's where I grew up in politics, inside the Labour Party, and it's been a journey to come here today and stand as the SNP candidate. That journey really happened when the Labour Party left me round about Blair coming to power, and throughout the noughties I became more and more convinced that in fact in order to achieve the type of beliefs I had, in order to achieve the change I wanted to see in society, it would be easier to do that if we started first in a small northern European country of a population of 5.5 million people, where there was a general support for the type of social democratic values that I was trying to adhere to, rather than remain as a small part of a much bigger country of Britain, where there was almost an inbuilt majority against any radical ideas. And that's why I became a firm supporter of independence, and when the starting pistol was fired on the referendum campaign, I was out of the blocks very quickly and spent 2 glorious years in that campaign, getting my political mojo back, if you like, getting enthused again, overcoming a lot of cynicism that I had had for many years about politics. And then when we didn't win on the 18th of September, I took the decision to join the Scottish National Party, as did 75,000 other people in the country as well, because I thought it was important that that energy that we developed during the referendum campaign had a focus and had somewhere to go. And I have to tell you, the Scottish National Party, the SNP, is still working through the process of that change to itself. You don't just quadruple your membership overnight and things stay the same. And it will probably take a while for that to settle down and the impact of all of these new members and that new enthusiasm to work its way through. But I think that the SNP of the future will be much younger, more female and more radical than the SNP of the past. And I have no hesitation about joining it and trying to work within it, although I would say this, that the party has, I hope, and needs to have a degree of humility, because it is seeking to represent the aspirations of a lot of people in this country, many of whom don't identify with the political process, don't identify with political parties. And I have got people working in my campaign who aren't members of the SNP, and they're extremely welcome. And I'm actually hoping, we maybe make it into this debate later, but because of the first past the post system that we have in this system, in this country for the Westminster Parliament, I am hoping that a lot of people who might not naturally identify with the SNP will lend me their vote and give me the support in order to achieve change in our political system. 1 minute, oh God, Raoul, well, briefly, the way I see it is this, that on the 18th of September, we gave the British establishment a shock with the referendum. We have the opportunity on the 7th of May to visit upon them their worst nightmare. We can send a majority of representatives from Scotland to the Palace of Westminster, whose first and only mandate will come from the people of Scotland, who are not tied in to the British establishment. And I think that will open up the possibility for real radical change, not just in Scotland, but it will accelerate that throughout the United Kingdom as well. As the night goes on, we'll be able to explain some of these more policies in detail, but three things form the cornerstones of what I'm standing on. An end to austerity economics that start penalising the poor, and an increase in government spending. The cancellation of the Trident programme and the shift of that money to health and education, and home rule for Scotland with proper economic powers to the Scottish Government that give us the ability here to change lives of people in Scotland, whether or not the Tories in the home counties think that's a good idea. That's what I'm standing for. I hope you'll support me, and I hope you vote SNP. Thank you.
I'm Sheila Gilmore.
Hi, I might just take it out as well, please. Thank you. My name's Sheila Gilmore. I was the MP for 5 years here until we ceased to have any MPs at the beginning of this week. Some people think that's a very good idea. Two people have told me they think it should just stay like that and we should never have any further MPs, but that's the legal position. In 2010, when I was standing for Parliament then, a lot of people that I encountered on the doors and in the streets would say, it won't make much difference, even if we get a Tory government, it'll be much the same, and nothing will change. And I think that the last 5 years have shown us what a big change there has been. At the end of the period of the Labour government, under Gordon Brown, Labour prevented the recession turning into depression. We had policies to stimulate the economy, for example, lowering VAT on a temporary basis. We had the car and boiler scrappage schemes. We had public works like house building and school building. And at that stage, when the election came, the economy was actually growing again and unemployment was falling. What the Tories and the Lib Dems in coalition did was to throw this into reverse, cutting spending dramatically and raising VAT. And as a result, growth shuddered to a halt, as you probably recall, and joblessness again began to rise. So many of the policies that were rushed through in 2010 were justified with the aim of reducing, in fact, eliminating the deficit by 2015. We said that wouldn't happen with those policies, and indeed it hasn't. In my own area, the one that I've done a lot of work on during this Parliament, which is in social security, we've seen the bedroom tax, we've seen job centre targets for sanctions, scrapping of the disability living allowance. And all of these policies, and many more, have led to, for example, the big rise in food bank demand, which didn't exist before. And that's the difference, I would say, that having a Conservative rather than a Labour government made. But this isn't just about getting rid of the Tories, it's an opportunity to elect a Labour government that will make radical progressive change that people in Scotland, and indeed people in the rest of the UK, so badly want to see. Raising the minimum wage, incentivising firms to pay the living wage, ensuring that government contractors pay the living wage, banning exploitative zero-hours contracts, guaranteeing jobs for the long-term unemployed. These are all the steps we need to successfully change our economy. And there's many other things that we can build on from the previous Labour government that have been effectively sidelined in the last 5 years. Tackling climate change by decarbonising our electricity supply, staying in the EU to protect jobs, retaining the Human Rights Act, and continuing to spend 0.7% of our gross national income on international development. Now, all the political parties, I think all at least, have pledged that we would pass a new Scotland Act as one of the first things we would do in government to devolve significant further powers to Holyrood. And I think we should be spending a lot more time in Scotland discussing how we use those powers, the ones we've already got, the ones that came through the 2012 Act and are already in effect, and the ones that are coming. I mean, the Scotland Act of 2012, not much talked about by the Scottish Government, strangely enough. That brings borrowing powers to the Scottish Government from this month. Now, one of the things that could be doing, as we stand here, is at least doubling, if not tripling, the spending on affordable housing in Scotland. I didn't see anything in that in the Scottish Government budget this year, which was rather disappointing. I think we do need politicians who actually want to do things and get on with things rather than endlessly debating them. Now, I've met many constituents who are listening to what's being said about, well, it really won't make much difference if we get Labour MPs or we get other sorts of MPs, we still might get rid of the Tories, and they'll be much the same. I think to try and second guess what's going to happen nationally is extremely difficult. To try and add up numbers and say, oh, a few here and a few there and maybe them and we can change the government. I want to see the end of this Conservative government. I believe that we as a Labour Party can win a majority, and if we do lose seats in Scotland and win seats in England, then there is a real risk that we don't get rid of this Tory government, and I passionately want to see that happen.
Hi, I can't pretend to be Peter McCall because it's too difficult. But I'm Pat Black and I'm standing in Edinburgh West. And I'm a little bit like Tommy that I was not involved in politics. Well, he was maybe more involved than me until reasonably recently. And I've spent most of my working life, about more than 35 years, working in social care. And what I've seen is that poor people get poorer, more people get poorer, people with disabilities get poorer, and it doesn't really matter what politicians say is happening in the economy, as far as I can see. So I disagree with Sheila because I think that there's very little to choose between the kind of elitist, male, centralist parties who kind of are all racing to get people who have money to get more money, as far as I can see. So, when I was having my political dilemma, I went for the Green Party, a bit like Tommy was talking about, what party really represented me. And what I felt was that what we're needing to do in the world, in the country, in the UK, and particularly in Scotland, that I'm most concerned about, is to really stand up for sustainability. And sustainability means social justice. People can't really live well and have a sustainable life unless there's social justice. And like the others have said, that means that we have to stop austerity. You know, the poorest people in the UK live on less than about £5,100 a year. And they've had a 9% cut since 2010. The richest people have had a cut of 3.5%. It's just not fair. It's not sustainable and it's not fair. And last night, Patrick Harvey from the Green Party was talking about economics. And you think about economics as, why do we think it's about corporations getting more money? Why do we listen to radio programmes that say corporations getting more money means the economy is growing? People have 0-hour contracts, they have rubbish jobs, and they have no security. My nephew lives in this, so I'm living in Edinburgh West, but my family come from here. I went to Portobello High School. And my nephew worked in Toys R Us, and he got moved on to a 0-hour contract. He can't guarantee that he can pay his rent, he can't go out with his girlfriend, he has to go and get Wonga loans, you know, the whole thing that happens. And I don't see that that's going to change unless we make some kind of fundamental shift. For me, the Green Party is talking about a minimum wage of £10 by 2020, an end to the austerity, to the bedroom tax, and also thinking about something in the longer term, fair enough, but a citizen's income, where we don't have to have a stigma of having something special if you're out of work or whatever your circumstances are that you need benefits. So benefits, the system that we have for benefits is broken. It's completely broken. It is never going to be fixed by tinkering around the edges. It needs fundamentally changed. And to do that, we need to think differently. We need to think that we all are entitled to a decent life. None of us should be in food banks. This country doesn't have a shortage of income, a shortage of food. It has a food waste problem. In my area, 6,000 people are using the food bank. That's outrageous. People are living in houses with metered electricity, which they don't have any insulation, and they're just pouring their money out the window. That's ridiculous. And in the Green Party, we're talking about really shifting public services into public hands, that we should be thinking locally about energy. Councils should be able to encourage the public to have local renewable sources of energy that people can profit from, that they can reinvest in their community. So for me, the additional thing that we're offering in the Green Party is something about really standing up for local democracy, for communities to have a voice, to not centralise. Centralising in the UK in Westminster doesn't work. Centralising in Edinburgh doesn't necessarily work. I was talking to somebody for Shetland today. That's not going to work for them. We need to be thinking much more locally about democracy, much more about individual right to decent life and community rights to decent life. I'm sure that must be 5 minutes. And we would stop trying to, and I could go on, because I think that we had our manifesto came out on Monday, and I think that if people want to have a look at the manifesto, there's a really big range of policies which are completely radical. And for us, we want to be elected, and we want to shift the way people are thinking. So I was at a surveyor's Hustings on Friday morning, and everybody was talking about land value tax. All of the different candidates and the surveyors. Land value tax is a green idea that gets rid of council tax and means that you pay for the value of your land, which means that if you live in the centre of Edinburgh and have land that's really expensive, you pay more than you do if you live somewhere that doesn't have a very good land value. It makes a lot of sense. And it reduces, because if you think about the people who are in poverty, the council tax is a big proportion of the tax that you pay. And so when we're thinking about reducing income tax, it doesn't actually make that much difference to some people. Reducing council tax does make a difference. So we have to think differently about these old ideas about this is the economy and we have to make it grow. We have to just think completely radically and differently. So I think the Green Party and Peter McCall is the person you should vote for. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Aisha and I am a long-standing socialist and I've lived in this area for 15 years. I'm not a professional politician. I'm also a member of Unite the Union. I've campaigned against the bedroom tax. I've campaigned for trade union rights. I've campaigned against privatisation, for Palestinian rights and against racism. And what we've seen in the political landscape is that the Labour, a mainstream party, has tail-ended the Tories. They voted for the welfare cap with the Tories, and the main parties will not reverse cuts and austerity. They in fact voted for Trident in the House of Commons, and the main parties stand to slash the public sector and refuse to pay nurses even a 1% increase. And what we've seen in the Edinburgh Council is the Edinburgh Council, led by the SNP and Labour, have made £22 million worth of cuts. That's a big amount, basically, and like all the main parties, including the Greens, that made cuts in the council in Brighton, basically, I stand completely against all cuts, basically, and a reversal of them all and an end to benefit sanctions. I want a living wage and I want it immediately for £10 an hour. I want Grangemouth renationalised, not at the behest of the bosses, Jim Ratcliffe, who held his workers to a ransom, and disgracefully the main parties like the SNP and Labour didn't support the workers there, basically. I'm also against the CBI, the bosses organisation, that supports lower taxes on the rich and low wages and a low wage economy and weak trade unions. Basically, I stand for public ownership, not private profit, renationalisation of the energy companies and capping their prices so people can actually afford to heat their homes. We live in the 6th richest country in the world, and yet we have pensioners dying of hypothermia. Sorry.
Is that better?
And
sorry to interrupt you, it's just there was complaints from the back, they couldn't hear you.
Aye, sorry. Okay. Reversing of the anti-trade union. Okay. End of anti-trade union laws, end to welfare and benefits actions, renationalisation of the banks. The greedy bankers have reaped millions of pounds in profits at the expense of the working class and the poor. Basically, they've reaped 80 billion in profits in the last few years, and that's how much we've suffered in austerity. And I believe in closing all tax loopholes and redistribution of wealth. I'm against all forms of racism and discrimination, and I don't want any imperialist wars, and I want decommissioning of Trident, because if we decommission Trident and we can put that money into 100 billion, which is used every year to every replacement of these weapons, we can build 650,000 homes, or we can boost employment and build state-of-the-art hospitals and employ 150,000 nurses. Basically, so I'm for a radical reorganisation of society, and I would support every protest, every strike, basically against privatisation of the NHS or privatisation of other services and bringing in private contracts into the council or the NHS, basically, and I'm against slashing of public services. I stand for international solidarity of the working class around the world, basically. So I would urge people to vote Tusk and resist the cuts and austerity and resist racism. And it's like Martin Luther King said, resistance is a language of the unheard.
Thank you very much to all four of you. That was very varied introductions, and I'm sure gave everybody a pretty good idea of the main things that the candidates stand for and think is important. Can I just say, in terms of, I'm about to throw it open to questions. I'm not really looking for long speeches from the floor. Okay, think more question time and less argument. So on that basis, there is a roving mic, and again, I appreciate there's a bit of a problem with the mic. If you hold it too close to your mouth, then it gets very difficult to hear. But the problem is, if we don't use the mics, then they can't hear it for the live streaming. So
no, it's okay. We couldn't use the PA, so don't worry about the live streaming for the mics.
Oh, all right. Okay, fine. Well, on that basis, there's a question at the back.
Thank you. As you can see, I'm quite an elderly gentleman, and since 1982, I've seen my country send young men and women abroad to other people's countries to kill and be killed. I'd like to know if the candidates here would commit, if elected, to vote against any intervention with military force in other people's countries, so we can put an end to making enemies of Scottish soldiers being sent abroad, men and women, to kill or be killed, and to create enemies instead of creating friends.
Yeah, I'm against all war, and I'm against the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, which was started in 2003. Basically, I believe that it's wrong to go and kill your brothers and sisters on the other side of the world, and it's pitting one working class people from another country against a working class of another country. And I believe that money could be used to put into housing, education, and public services, and we can have a decent sort of society where we consider people from another country our brothers and sisters, and I'm against all forms of war.
Yeah. I agree with Nisha as well, that and the Green Party stands for peace, not war. And we would put an end to Trident, which is a pretty obvious starting point as well. and come out of NATO, because a first strike nuclear weapon is not a good idea. And I think that when we've been thinking about war, it's really difficult to disentangle it from the interests of global conglomerates. When we talk a lot of war, has got a background of wanting oil, and that lots of the things that are going on in the world are linked to fossil fuels, and we really need to be changing that. But that would change a lot of our thinking if we started to think about renewables, and less dependency on oil could reduce a lot of the underhand things that are going on that create wars in the background.
I voted against our using ground troops in Syria during the course of this Parliament, but I would differ from the two previous speakers in thinking that it's not always quite that straightforward. I would much rather we did have genuine and effective international peacekeeping forces. We've never quite got there, even in all the years since we've had the League of Nations and then the United Nations. We never managed to do that, but I think there are times when we have to think about the possibility, and I know it can be very difficult to do, but of some interventions having a humanitarian aspect to them, and that to say you would never ever do that is potentially to leave other people vulnerable to those who don't share those values and who don't care and will massacre their own people or will massacre their neighbours, and we have to think about that.
How safe is it in Iraq right now? Or Libya right now?
Excuse me?
How safe is it? For
It's
these
not
people in Iraq, their own citizens, how safe are they?
It is not safe. It is not safe.
Because of what? Because Tony Blair poked his nose in to get money, oil.
Well,
And Libya, and Afghanistan.
Could you let the cat?
those are not the only.
candidates
I mean, to
speak,
make a
please?
generalised statement, it's very easy. It's very easy to reduce the whole thing to talk about Iraq. What I wanted to say was there have been.
Could you
There
let
have
her
been-
speak, please?
There have been other issues. There were issues during the course of the last Labour government. There were the interventions in the Kosovan war, and I think we have to sometimes take a slightly wider view of that before you simply jump in and say it's always bad.
Obama admitted that ISIS rose out of their invasion of Iraq.
Could I point out that this isn't an opportunity for us to come to a conclusion about what we all think? There are a lot of different views in this room. The purpose of tonight is for you to hear what the candidates believe, and you can then decide whether to vote for them or not. I dare say you won't agree with a lot of what you hear, because you're going to hear 4 different views on a lot of subjects. I don't want to. No, we're not. We're not having interruptions. Okay, thank you. I don't want interruptions. I want the candidates to speak.
I wouldn't say either that I would be against all wars in all circumstances, although I would have a general predisposition to try and avoid them and to work for peace and disarmament throughout the world. But I think we can say with some certainty that pretty much every military adventure that the last Labour government introduced has made the world a more dangerous place rather than a safer one, and has been an appalling legacy for that government and for its leader, Tony Blair, in particular. I would have, well, I wasn't a member by then, but I would have worked against that. I was on all the Stop the War marches during the time about Iraq and Afghanistan. I think, to be honest, I mean, I'm also extremely concerned at the way in which the forces of the right in this country and in Washington are trying to invent a new Cold War and represent the Russian people as some sort of international bogeymen and women that they almost are shaping up for. You'd think they're keen to get towards a Third World War situation in a way, and this is ridiculous, and it's making the world an extremely dangerous place. And the other thing in terms of that we need to take action on is the Middle East. I mean, I would, for example, support the use of our troops to form
Just on that point, as Tommy's cat, Tony Blair took us into those wars, Scottish boys lost their lives, and you brought up Kosovo, Sheila, as where we went in and we intervened for the good of the people there. Well, we know 5 Scottish boys over there who did the bit and who held, and then who were made redundant, and that was under Tony Blair as well.
I'd just like to say, Sheila, I think Labour's had their chances, to be really honest with you. I'm from the west of Scotland, you know, and I've moved through here a few months back there. And I feel the only party that will do really, really well in Scotland is the SNP, because they've obviously tried to fight for years, but they're coming really strong now. And I really like to see them getting into the fair. I feel Labour and Conservative have built so, for years and years and years, and done nothing for people, No offence, Sheila, I know you're trying your best and all that, but I hope you pray that you don't get in, Exactly those, we're saying about the wars and all that, there's been a lot of problems, people are getting paid off and all the rest of it, it's not happening, so, I could talk all night, But I just like to thank Tommy for coming from Labour to SNP, which is good, for the Scottish people. I feel in Scotland there's too many people voting Conservative and Labour, and a lot of other parties. People should be voting SNP because it's national. and I think if everybody done that, we'd get independence.
That's right, thank you. Okay,
That's my opinion.
Well, let Sheila come back on this now.
The history of the Labour Party is that it was a Labour Party that introduced the welfare state. It was a Labour Party coming to power in 1997 that brought the Scottish Parliament, and very quickly it did that as well. It was one of the first commitments, and it was honoured very, very fast. The Labour government did make a difference to the poor in the UK. Well, if you think that, look back to the situation. Well, you can look back to the situation of, for example, the levels of poverty among pensioners prior to 1997 and the way that was improved. The child poverty was reduced. We did invest in schools, in the health service and in education, and these made very real changes. And a lot of quite neutral and independent research will bear that out. The general view of people active in the field is that the Labour government, during the period from 1997 to 2010, did make a real difference. Now, we didn't do everything that we would all want to do. We didn't do all of it within that period. But I would still contend that there was a very real difference. And the contrast, and that's where I started from, the contrast from the period since has been considerable.
Yeah, like the other two candidates here who support intervention in some cases and in some cases not. I don't believe in any intervention because I think war is a weapon of the ruling classes, of the bosses and of bankers that run the big multinationals that want to go to war to make profits out of the arms industry basically, and at the same time subjugate workers at home by paying them lower wages, basically in exploitative conditions and setting people up against each other. And the gentleman that said that nothing's changed in Libya and places like that, in Iraq and Afghanistan, they've made the situation worse. And those people that say we should act in the interest of humanitarianism or for women's rights are wrong too, because women's rights in Afghanistan have gone backwards since intervention rather than forward.
I would just take issue with the idea that child poverty has improved. I think that we really see people getting poorer. There's been interventions, there's been trying to do things, but there's sort of stigmatization of people of the welfare system and the way in which the austerity measures have made it worse, but the seeds of it were already there. The seeds of saying that those people who use those public services, really, the welfare state, are bad people. That was around, that sort of seed has been growing for a long time. And I really think that child poverty, it's outrageous, the level of child poverty we have. Food banks, child poverty, it's shocking. Muirhouse is part of my area, and I worked in Muirhouse 30 odd years ago. And some of the houses that really people shouldn't have had to live in then are still there, and people are still living in them. It isn't fair. That's through all different government changes. Nothing has got better for folk. So I think that we need a radical change. If we keep thinking about the welfare system as something we can just tinker about with, we'll just be going on forever and things will just get worse and more complicated. complicated and more expensive to administer. You know, benefit fraud is a tiny, tiny drop in a massive sea of money and tax avoidance. And we spend, I don't know what it is, 300, I've got the figures here somewhere, but it's something like 300 times as much energy and staff time goes into recovering a tiny benefit fraud and not into tax avoidance. It's outrageous.
Do you want to just come back briefly and then we'll move on to another question?
It was sort of a different point as well. It was just to ask what the other three members, I've read a little personal bit and I know that Sheila disagrees with austerity cuts, disagrees with Trident being a CND member, and obviously only partially agrees with TTIP. But the voting that you've done in Westminster, Sheila, you didn't show for the austerity cuts that now affect your constituency the most in Scotland. You didn't show for your Trident vote either. So being a party member of the CND and then not showing for the vote against it, it's a sort of juxtaposition in my book. And TTIP you fully agreed with. So we can tell that what your personal beliefs are and how you vote are absolutely opposites. I'd like to ask the other
do I not get a chance to answer some of that?
I'd like to ask the other candidates if they use their moral compass as well.
Well, I'll come back at the end then, because you've made some statements that aren't quite accurate.
Just as you all have, I think, Sheila, I think that's what you call politics.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure I got what the question was there. Is it, you know...
Just to say, obviously party members that are in, and it's not just you, Sheila, so it is unfair just to get you, but party members vote against what seems to be their own moral compass. So Sheila's put down that she's against austerity, but didn't bother showing for the austerity.
Okay, don't repeat yourself. What's your question? Just in a sentence, please.
Would you go against your own moral compass and how you feel would it affect your constituency just to toe your party line?
Right, okay. I mean, yes, I think so, right? But I think I'm in a position that I wasn't when I was in the Labour Party, which is that I'm actually at ease with the direction that my party's going in nationally and in terms of its intervention into the UK Parliament as well. So it's not, I don't have to come here and ask you to vote for me as an individual and vote for my personal position on things. I can ask you to vote for my party position. Save that, there are a few things where the debate is still underway. For example, fracking, which we may take up in a minute. I mean, I'm very much against fracking. I would have voted against it, I will vote against it, and not just to put a halt on it, but to ban it. I don't think it should be part of a balanced energy policy for the future. However, I wouldn't pretend to you that that is a policy of the SNP at this point in time. The policy of the SNP is to have a moratorium while there's an inquiry into it. And there's certainly a debate that's raging and one that's going to be had over the next 12 months. But I can tell you what side of that debate I'm on. And if push came to shove, and the party took a view, for example, to go ahead with fracking, I would vote against that and I would defy my party line and take the consequences. Okay, so that would be an example. I can't conceive of anything else really, because well, I suppose if the party flipped and decided it was going to vote for the renewal of Trident after all, then I would break the party line. But I think by the time you get to that stage, you're probably leaving the party, to be honest. And I mean, and the thing is that, I mean, I respect Sheila Gilmore, but she and a number of her colleagues are in a position where they don't agree with some of the things that the Labour Party is doing. They probably didn't agree with some of the things that the last Labour government did. But nonetheless, they are asking for you to vote for them so that that party gets more representation in Parliament, and other parties are denied that representation in Parliament. So I think you have to ask yourself this question at the end of the day. What is going to be better in terms of the outcome of this election? Would it be to give Ed Miliband a majority Labour government where the Labour Party can operate unfettered in terms of doing what it would like to do? Or would it be better if there was a government built around the Labour Party, but without it having a majority, and it requiring to talk to other parties in the House of Commons, particularly those in the left, to consult with them and to work with them in terms of policy? Because I actually think that would make for a better government, a more radical government, and one which probably would be more in tune, not just with the people in Scotland, but with some of the rank and file Labour parties in England as well. So I think that's the outcome. And when Sheila said earlier that don't risk there being a Labour government, we've heard this mantra about, you know, if you don't vote Labour, you'll let the Tories in. That's not true. You know, there will only be a Tory government after this election if there are more people in the House of Commons who support a Tory government than who are opposed to a Tory government. That's the only way it can happen. I am opposed till hell freezes over to there being a Tory government, and I will vote against it. So if I were elected here instead of the Labour Party, I can guarantee you it will make no change to the electoral arithmetic in the House of Commons. What it will mean is that Ed Miliband has to talk to other people before he can form a government.
So, the question is, would you vote with your conscience or with your party, I think? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would. The Green Party is a democratic party, so we vote, our policies are made up by the members. So a lot of new members have joined, we have a lot of new policies. And so I'm a bit like Tommy, I can't conceive of a situation where my moral compass would not have been part of the decision that was made in the beginning. But I joined politics because I think that it's really time for people to use their moral compasses. And I wouldn't vote for anything. I don't care about party lines, actually. I'm not at all interested in party lines. So I would vote for what I believed. And I think that I've been a tactical voter in the past, and look where it's got us. You know, I have a lot of responsibility, same as everybody else who's voted for this to keep this person out. You know, you end up with the least worst option, and I've given that up. I've decided that I'm going to vote for what I believe in from now on, and I don't care if it's tactically wise or unwise. I think if we all do that, then we'll get something different.
Well, Tusk is a coalition of trade unionists and socialists around the country, and our policies are clear that we're against all cuts, we're against Trident, and we're against TTIP, and we're for any sort of protest or strikes that further the interests of the working class. I have protested against Trident before. I've been up to Faz Lane, I've been arrested there before. I'm against all cuts. I've campaigned against the privatisation of things like the post office, the railways. I'm against cuts in the council to the budget. I'm against cuts in the NHS. And I'm completely against TTIP. I don't support it in any way because it gives power to the companies to say to a government that you can't legislate to protect workers or you can't legislate to protect the NHS because we can sue your government. It gives a free rein to the free market, basically. And obviously, the big issue with TTIP is NHS. They'll want to privatise it and give it to private contractors, and I'm completely against that. And if I was elected, I'd stand on a worker's wage because I'm against all corruption. I don't believe in taking $7,000 a year as part of Tusk policy to only stand for a worker's wage. And I think it's disgraceful what happened with Jack Straw and Malcolm Rifkin. They were caught taking kickbacks from the rich and the powerful.
Yeah, I just wanted, I don't know what, I maybe misheard you, and I'm sorry if I did, but I think you said I was for TTIP?
Yeah, you voted partially for it.
No, there has not been a vote on TTIP. It is not, it is only undergoing negotiation at the moment. So, as far as I'm aware, and you may be aware of a vote that I didn't think I took part in, we have not...
It was an email you sent to me. What I did is I petitioned you to represent the constituents, and when the vote did come up, go against fully TTIP in all its forms at the moment because it's not clear. No one wants to talk about the trade agreement itself, they just want a blanket vote. And what you emailed me back, sorry, was it wouldn't affect Scotland, so you would vote with the party. I'll bring the email in next time, Sheila.
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure what's yours in referring to a specific vote, and I was just trying to track that back. I mean, our position on, we have not said we're definitely and absolutely against all aspects of an international trade agreement. It's a debate in progress, I would say, in the party as well. We are against the international dispute resolution mechanism. We've made that clear. We are against the inclusion of the health services and other public services in such a treaty, and we think they should be explicitly excluded, not in some sense implicitly excluded, and that no agreement should be signed that would reduce the protections that people have at work or environmental protections in our country. Now, at the moment, that treaty is still, I suspect, not particularly near being signed. I mean, I have to say other political parties have previously said similar things in terms of, I think both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon have said that in principle they thought that there was a lot to be said for TTIP and it could improve the economy of the country. They may have changed their minds. That was a couple of years back. As the debate has gone on, people are changing their minds. But, and I think the campaign is very important, but I did not say, I would not say, oh, it doesn't apply to Scotland. I don't quite know where that came in. On the tribal vote, this is not the vote that makes that was not the vote that was going to make the decision. The decision is going to be in 2016 when the main gate decision is taken. I've said I would vote against it then, and I will stick by that. The reason I didn't vote on the vote was because it was clearly designed, I thought, as a piece of political posturing in order to say that, the Labour Party in Scotland was split on this. And it wasn't going to make the slightest bit of difference to what was going to happen, because that was not the vote on anything happening. A lot of my colleagues did vote against the renewal of the initial stages of the renewal of tribal in the last Parliament. I wasn't there. It got through on Tory votes, as it turned out, not necessarily Labour votes. I can't remember I wasn't present at the vote on the Charter for Budget Responsibility because I had another commitment. It wasn't a deliberate attempt not to be there. But I have to say, we do not think that the way it was phrased, and you have to look sometimes at the way these things are phrased, this was not a vote about how many cuts there should be. And we are quite clear that our position going forward is very different from that of the Conservatives. Yes, we do want to reduce the deficit. Yes, we do want to balance the books, because there is nothing particularly healthy about having to constantly borrow on your revenue spending and end up really not putting money into public services because you're simply repaying borrowing. But our plan for doing that is very different. It is about tax rises, it is about productivity gains, it's about social security gains, undermining the causes of a lot of the increases in social security spending, which incidentally the Tories have not been able to do. Their spending is actually still going up despite everything they've done. So I see our policy as being very different.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Right, I think there's two questions at the back, and I'll come to you later. Okay, if I take both of them just now and take them together.
A number of the speakers mentioned zero contracts, including Sheila Gilmore, who said that as part of the radical progressive changes, there would be, the Labour Party would be banning exploitative zero-hour contracts. In May of last year, same Sheila Gilmore, when she was in discussion...
Can I just ask that we have some general questions? And the reason I'm saying that is I'm a bit concerned that the other candidates aren't getting really so much of a say. And this, I think it's really important that everybody gets a say. So can you try and keep your question reasonably general? I'm not trying to stop you speaking. I would just like you to ask a more general question that applies to everybody, okay?
Yeah. Most of the candidates did mention zero contracts and seemed to be against them, including Sheila Gilmore. All I'm wanting to ask is, why is it that in May of last year she said that while I don't object to the principle of zero-hour contracts, I'm concerned about this policy change, and she also said in November of last year, I'm sure that some people would like the opposition to table amendments to abolish the zero-hour contracts, but our position has never been to say that they should be abolished totally. My question is, to all the candidates, but specifically Sheila Gilmore, why is it that she doesn't object to the principle of zero-hour contracts, and that her position is that they shouldn't be abolished totally?
Thank
My
you.
experience is that they should be.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I think there was a second question at the back there.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that is exactly the subject that I want to touch on myself. But I think the question that needs to be answered is not just because the fact is that the Labour Party are now saying they would abolish zero-hour contracts, but they had 13 years in governments, which in fact not only did they not abolish them, they actually encouraged them. And we had Tony Blair travelling the world, talking about the UK having the worst labour laws and to attract inward investment. But apart from that, they're not actually saying they want to abolish them anyway. They're saying that they may abolish them after 12 weeks. So what are they saying for this 12 weeks? Is this 12 weeks a test of the worker to see if they're capable of working a normal contract? Because the natural outcome of 12 weeks would be that an employer would simply employ someone else for a further 12 weeks on 0-hour contracts, because that's exactly what's happening now. So if you've got a stipulation for 12 weeks, rather than abolition on day one of employment, you're simply encouraging the continuation of 0-hour contracts.
Okay, thank you. So that's... take another topic as well. Is somebody else got a different topic?
It's just to go back
okay,
to
no, the gentleman behind you, who had his hand up ages ago.
Yeah, I think why people, the reason why people think that Labour and Tories are quite similar is when you look at one of the leading figures in the Labour Party at the moment, Rachel Reeves, who has come out with comments that Labour would be tougher than the Tories on welfare. And she also says that we're not the party of the out of work on welfare, we're the party of people in work. I mean, that's quite astonishing for a Labour MP to say those things. And I was wondering what the candidates have to say about that, because Sheila Gilmore spoke about opposing these brutal austerity cuts and the stigmatisation that comes from the Tories and the right-wing press that's been spoken about. But Labour does nothing to dispel those myths. It simply goes along with them because it thinks they'll get them votes, and I think it's a really quite disgusting attitude that the Labour has towards their own supporters, really. And another question about the council cuts, that are massive council cuts that are coming to local government all over. In Edinburgh, I've just passed the budget cutting 22 million from the budget. So I kind of partly addressed to Tommy, would you agree to oppose the council cuts? Because this is about people's lives, this is the cutting of services, this is possibly centres closing down within the next couple of years, and this is a massive cut, of course, that's coming from Westminster. But I think the SNP, I think they've said some decent things about opposing austerity at a national level, but I think to be credible, I think they've got to do it at a local level as well.
Thank you. So that's two questions then. One about the minimum wage, or sorry, 0 hours contracts, and one a sort of more general question about cuts and austerity. So, would you like to go first?
Sure. The zero. Okay, so I'd said earlier about the 0 hour contracts that we oppose 0 hour contracts and would be thinking about a temporary minimum wage. And also we have an idea that a policy that you link the director's payment to the lowest paid worker by multiple, so that either everybody gets paid more or nobody does. So that would be quite a sophisticated way to try and change some of the disparity between people that are paid the most in an organisation and people at the bottom, and we would do away with 0 hour contracts. I think the council tax and local government is a really important issue, and in Edinburgh the Green Party did come up with an alternative budget which was about tourist levies and managed to make it much more sustainable to keep some of the centres. Of course, it's not got enough councillors to get voted in, but they did show there was an alternative.
Sorry, no.
It did show that there was an alternative. And I think that we really have to think about this council tax cap that's been on for so long, because councils don't have any freedom, and that destroys our ability to have a democratic process in our councils. We really need to be able to say yes to the way council tax is spent, and we need to be able to say yes to increases if we want them. So we really would support devolving things as locally as possible and changing the whole idea of council tax and having something else instead, like land value tax.
Thank you.
Well, I'm against all zero-hour contracts and I want them immediately stopped now, and I think that's correct what Derek said in the audience, to have them for, not have them for 12 weeks and then decide whether to get a full-time contract or not, or a secure contract or not, is just another way of exploiting people, sacking them and then re-employing them, re-employing other people in zero-hour contracts. And it's to do with neoliberalism and the idea that we need a flexible labour market and weak trade unions and exploiting people, basically. And you know, this is a country that's one of the richest in the world, yet we have Victorian trade union, anti-trade union legislation laws going back to the Victorian era, when poor or the workers had to beg to get a job at the behest of an employer, and that's what these zero-hour contracts are. Basically, they should be illegal and they should be abolished, and they're against human rights and the right to work, basically, for every worker, basically. And the other thing that was asked was council cuts. I'm against 22 million being cut in the budget, and what I'd say is, would the candidates set an illegal budget in the councils in Scotland to show that they're against austerity and against cuts, if they say that they're against cuts, and they should oppose them, basically locally and nationally, basically. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that with the Labour Party, they've continued with neoliberalism and Thatcherism, and said things like productivity, which is a mask for exploiting people and getting more out of them, making them work harder, making them pay less, basically attacking social security. In fact, we have, even though it was the Labour Party that bought in the social security, they've made so many attacks on it that they're very near the Tory party today, and we're left with practically nothing of what was put in place to basically protect working class people, basically. And I'm against all benefit sanctions, and I want them removed immediately, and I want a proper welfare system that protects the poor and workers and that gives proper protection to people.
Sheila, there's more taxes than people in the country, do you know what I mean?
Sorry?
There's more taxes in the country than people.
Taxes?
Aye, tax and income tax, bedroom tax, water tax, windy tax.
Well, I don't think there's a window tax now, although I think there was in the 18th century. I mean, I think I was going to say something about.
Money-making business, that's all it is, it's a money-making business. That's it, bottom line.
What I think we want in a society is one where those people who can afford it contribute so that we can have the services we want to have. A lot of, for example, talked about people saying they would like to have Nordic-style services in Scotland. We could have a Nordic-style economy. But don't think there aren't going to be taxes if you want that. The issue is not whether there should be taxes or there shouldn't be taxes, but how you structure those, who pays them, whether they're progressive or regressive. And that's a conversation we have to have.
You don't mind paying something, but you don't want to get robbed, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, and that is the debate that I think we need to have. I think we need to have it on a number of levels. I think we need to have it here in Scotland, for example, about how we fund our local councils. Because it's all very well to freeze council tax for 7 years or 8 years, as has been happening. It's very interesting that it's also a policy which was brought in very quickly by the coalition government at Westminster. They like freezing the council tax as well. Freezing the council tax has a number of regressive effects. It's a regressive tax anyway. The people who benefit most from the freeze are those who are paying for the higher valued properties. People at the bottom of the income range who would have been getting council tax benefit have got absolutely zero benefit from the council tax freeze. And they are the ones who are probably most dependent on the services which end up being cut. We've seen that in social care, and there's a tie in there to 0 hours contracts. We have people working in the social care sector who are indeed on these kind of contracts. There's no justification for that. given that this is work that has to be carried on. It's not temporary work, it's not something that's only going to be there for a short time and isn't going to be needed after that. This is long-term work. People said, well, why didn't the Labour government abolish this? Again, it's an interesting cry that echoes a lot of what the Tories say all the time. But there have been very real increases in the use of these contracts in the very recent past. One constituent who came to me because her large department store employer, she'd been working for them on a part-time basis, which suited her, it was to do with school hours. She'd been doing that for 20 hours a week for years and years, and the employer came along 3 years ago and said, no, we're moving you off that, you've got to have a flexible contract or nothing at all. Now, as somebody who had childcare responsibilities, that simply wasn't working for her. So these things are increasing. Our proposals would enable people to get that power back, because at the moment it's not the individual's choice as to whether they're working these hours, but they have little choice over it, and that's why I want to see that stopped. There were probably a number of other things, but I don't want to...
12 weeks, the 12 weeks.
Well, that's our proposal at the moment. It's interesting that when people say that, the provisions that were brought in about agency workers used a sort of similar time frame, and people said, oh, that won't work, it won't work, because people will simply, sack one lot and taken another, and there is actually not evidence that that has actually happened. You have to monitor that and make sure it doesn't happen. But I think that the proposals that we have would make a very real change in that, and it's very important that we do that. And I won't accept from anyone that we have supported the coalition government's cuts in social security, having spent so much time speaking against them and voting against them for the last 5 years. I can assure you that that is not our position.
Right, there's a lot of questions. I hope I'll remember them all. The first thing to say is that, I don't know if people know this, but I'm actually something of an accidental businessman. I, along with a few other people, I started the Stand Comedy Club as a business 15 years ago, and we still keep going, and it is a commercial organisation. It charges people for drinking for tickets, and it pays staff and pays the bills. And so, this maybe comes back to the question over there about moral compass, because I think it's important that you judge people not just by what they say, but what they do. And I'm proud to say that in our small company, we have tried to put into practice, even without any obligation to do so, some of the things that people are now talking about. We've long paid well over the minimum wage. We've long prided ourselves in paying the best bar wages in Edinburgh. And I'm proud to say that over the last 12 months, we've now become an accredited living wage employer. And even some of our 17-year-olds in payroll get paid as a minimum £7.85 an hour, and most people are actually earning more than that. And we're a small business, we can manage to do it. The reason why we can manage to do it is because we make, a couple of years ago we didn't make any profit at all, and we make very little. But we do it. So and we do it because we believe in it and treating people decently. And the other thing is, in terms of 0 hours contracts, the word exploitative has been creeping into the debate here, because you hear politicians saying, oh, we're against exploitative 0 hours contracts. And I'm not sure if they mean because that's a definition of all 0 hours contracts, or they want to divide things into exploitative and non-exploitative 0 hours contracts. And it seems to me that if you're talking about a situation where an employee's got a part-time job, say in a bar or whatever, and they have an arrangement with the bar manager that they want to work on a Tuesday this week or a Wednesday this week or whatever, and that's by mutual agreement, you can't really call that a contract. And to bring that sort of thing into the debate, I think clouds the issue, and it's quite mischievous. The fact of the matter is that if we're talking about something that's somebody's principal job, some employers are almost going back in history to a time when people used to turn up at the factory gates at 7 o'clock in the morning to see if there was work that day. And they would be sent home if there wasn't work that day. They wouldn't. And that's the type of situation that that we're getting to in some parts of this country with some employers. And that's what needs to be tackled and outlawed. And all of that needs to be outlawed from day one. You shouldn't be allowed to do that at all, whether it's 12 weeks or whether it's 1 week. And so I think in terms of defining the thing, I would probably define it by whether or not it was somebody's principal job, to be honest. And you might want to have legislation that's different for stuff that's over 15 hours a week or stuff that's less than 15 hours a week. But certainly if it is somebody's principal job, then everyone should have the basic human right to have a contract of employment that in advance says how many hours a week they work, what they get paid for it, and providing they turn up for work, they should get paid for it. You know, I mean, we do that in my company. Sometimes, you know, we put people in the bar shift, and sometimes the comedian calls up and is sick and the gig's pulled, the gig's cancelled, we give people their money back and they go home. But we still pay the bar staff for the shift because they turned up for the shift. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's the way I think it should be done. So, now what was the other question?
It's about cuts. I was thinking about
the council cuts, yeah.
The SNP's role in the council cuts in it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, here's the thing.
You record this while.
I would much rather the Edinburgh City Council was not cutting back its budget. There's plenty of things it should be spending more money on. But if the budget that's available to those councillors is being reduced, then I think it's probably better that they make the decision as to where that money is spent than anybody else does, and certainly the central government does. And I think you need to track it back, because I mean, the reason why the budget's being cut, not because of the council tax freeze, right? Council tax freeze is actually being fully funded by the Scottish government. The reason why council budgets are going down is because the money that the Scottish government has to spend on services in Scotland has been cut by 4.5% over the last 5 years by the Tory coalition. That's why there's a lot less money coming into the Scottish government to be able to spend and stuff. So they can't just keep going. That's one of the reasons why I voted yes in the referendum, because I think we should have control over our own resources and our own wealth in this country and be able to spend all of it, not just the bits that George Osborne and the Chancellor of the Exchequer decides to give to us. So at the end of the day, the only way I think you can get to a situation where councils increase their spending, and because that's the will of the people who elected them, is to have the people in Scotland in charge of their own government, and that government be in charge of all of the resources and wealth that there is in this country. But until we get to that, we'll do our best by arguing for more powers to the Scottish government and more ability for it to have control over the wealth that's there, and then maybe we can get to a situation of growth. And just to say that people that I think Aisha was talking about neoliberal economics, I mean, actually, in terms of I don't want to be disingenuous to the Green and Tusk candidates, but in terms of the people who are likely to get elected from Scotland into the Westminster Parliament, the SNP is actually the only party that's putting forward a non-neocon philosophy. We're actually putting forward the policy that used to be the policy of the Labour Party in the 1940s and 1950s, which is that, of course, you should borrow, to spend money, to invest, to create jobs, and that in turn will raise taxes that you can collect to pay back the debt and create more wealth, and you get into a virtuous circle of economic investment, rather than saying that the deficit is everything and for some strange reason we have to pay that back by 2020, even though all of us are used to having debts in our personal lives which last an awful lot longer than that.
I'm aware of 4 more questions around the room. I'll take them in 2 pairs, and so we'll see where we go.
Oh, yes, buddy.
My question is about fossil fuels, and I'd like to know what your party would do to reduce our dependence at the moment on fossil fuels and commit to supporting the renewable sector as much as it seems to be supporting the oil industry at the moment.
And this gentleman here. Which one? Oh, all right, let him, because he's got supplementary. I'll come to you in a minute then.
All right, mine's just supplementary. It's mainly for Tommy. What was actually asked, part of the question about the council cuts is, would you support our council to stand up against these cuts from Westminster? It's not an attack on the SNP, but I'm a little bit bored of this plain Westminster culture without a real answer of what we would do. And I felt like you just glossed over it by saying your budget's been cut by Westminster, rather than saying that you would support an SNP council to stand against the cuts and actually make a difference in Scotland. And that's what I'm missing out with the SNP a little bit. I feel like it's just too much blame Westminster without a real thing to say what they would do against austerity. and again, they were the ones that said that if we got independence, they'd support corporation tax cuts. Would you support corporation tax cuts the same as the Tory government?
Thank you. There's a question over here as well.
Last question about about the EU, and following up on the 0 hours thing. Broadly, I think I completely agree with the sort of exploitative nature of it. There is an element of it, I'm a student at a 0 hours contract, and that means that my employer can't make me work. That's a very niche thing.
Sorry, very good.
question to the panel. In terms of the EU, quite a big role of an MP is interacting with that in terms of a multinational body and how that works across the continent. How would you approach it in terms of the different things that are going on in the next Parliament? How would you look to deal with your party and various things in terms of voting on the EU and how things are progressing?
No, well, I think that's enough questions for now. We'll come back to the other ones in a minute.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is the question from the back there on fossil fuels. I'm actually completely for green jobs. I support the climate marches. I support getting rid of Trident. I'm against globalisation and the destruction of our environment, basically. I believe in renationalisation and creating green jobs. And I also believe in a very, very radical change in society, one that's revolutionary, where we can employ workers who work in fossil fuels in hospitals and schools and doing something that benefits society as a whole rather than destroying the environment, basically. And it's the fault of the bosses and the big multinationals that exploit those workers, that invest in fossil fuels and also basically not just exploit the workers but also damage the environment. In 300 years in the existence of capitalism, we have seen the environment being completely practically destroyed, and we're heading towards that environmental catastrophe. So I actually support environmental protests and environmental justice, because I think it's part of fighting for socialism, and that's an important thing. And the other thing I've already talked about zero-hour contracts, so I'm not going to say anything else more about that. But the other thing I'd like to say in response to Tommy saying that he's the only person here who doesn't support neoliberalism, well,
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Well,
I think he said of the people he thought were most likely to get elected.
Right, okay. Well, I'd like to see a socialist being elected who's always opposed neoliberalism and Thatcherism, basically, and has grown up with knowing nothing but that, basically, and being at the brunt end of that, because that's what it's like for working class people in Scotland and around the country. For the last 20 years they've known nothing but attacks, basically. So Tusk are putting forward a socialist alternative.
There's a lot of questions to remember, but I think we started with fossil fuels, didn't we? And renewables. The Green Party stance is obviously about renewables, but really we need to start investing now. You know, there's no point in waiting. You know what's going to happen is everybody's going to go on about oil, and then suddenly there'll be a panic to do something. But now if we start investing, then from our perspective, we would like to stop using fossil fuels faster, but we still need to invest now. Nobody knows how long it's going to last, how difficult it is to extract, even if it goes ahead. So we need to be investing right now. We need to be putting money into the northeast, because the northeast is struggling with their marine development for renewables. And so we really need to do that, to support fossil fuels to be stopped. And I mean, it goes along with fracking and TTIP as well. So it's a big question. We need to really stop all our dependence on fossil fuels. And it kind of leads into what we're thinking about the European Union as well, because the European Union needs to be a body which takes more environmental care and which is working across boundaries to support change, and not to be somewhere that can approve things like TTIP and start us to increase the corporations and the benefits to corporations from some of the things that go on. So, and I'm losing track of the next question, but you were talking about
It was about how you interact with Europe, I think, was the main.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about Europe, that we need that we would stay in Europe and we would work to change Europe. Europe was a good idea in the beginning, peace and not war, that's a great idea, and we still need to support that to change because it's gone sort of in a different direction. But we would stay in Europe and work from within it. You talked also about council tax, but that was more a question for Tommy, wasn't it? But about council tax and how do we... Councils need to be able to raise their own taxes.
Well, it wasn't really, my question was just, would you support a council?
Okay, that's fine.
Well, to start with the EU, we are a party that believes that, on balance, it's advantageous for us to be part of the European Union, and that's why we've not been supportive of the kind of moves that throughout this Parliament, certainly some of the Tories have been trying to make towards a very quick exit from that. I think actually we should be doing far more to explain to people what the advantages are. Not everything that the EU does is right, but there are some of the things that we benefit from now. Some of the rules about employment, for example, have come from European Union regulations that have then been applied in this country. So they actually can bring higher standards, and that's what we have to be working for. I suspect, however, that Europe is going to continue to be one of these things that's going to get discussed regardless within the next Parliament and onwards. That doesn't mean it doesn't need reformed, but we think we need to be part of it to reform it, not constantly standing, threatening to sort of take up all the way and not actually take properly part in those negotiations. We have a strong commitment to the environment. I talked about the decarbonisation of our electricity supply. We need to transition out of our dependence on fossil fuels, and that doesn't mean that we can just suddenly do it tomorrow. We have to look at why some of the renewable projects that I think we all are very keen to see happening aren't happening, and whether that is entirely a technological matter or we just aren't putting in enough investment. For example, the wave power company in Leith, which actually went into administration. It's still in its research stages, but it's gone into administration because it has not got the resource to continue that investment. And we, I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs of why that's happened, but if it is government investment they need, then we have to be doing that. We can't be totally dependent on one form of renewable energy. But for all of us, we have to make that the journey we need to make. And it is about, sometimes it's about some quite small scale things. It is about, we've got a green investment bank so-called, but it's not even a bank because it hasn't been given banking powers by the current government, and we would do that. We need to ensure that we are reducing a lot of the dependence on energy with the homes that we build, the standards we put into those homes, which have been increased and improved. We have to insulate the homes that we've got. All of these things are hugely important. They do require investment, and the Labour government will borrow to invest. We are not saying that isn't the way to go. We have said this throughout our history, and we still maintain that. We will be borrowing as a government. We will be borrowing to invest.
I'll see if I can remember all the questions. To come to you first, sir, because I don't want to dodge any direct questions. So here's the thing. I would certainly support, it depends what you mean by campaign against. If you mean by that, illustrate the effects of cuts and why they're wrong and the consequences of them and explain why they shouldn't be, then yes, of course I'm in favour of that, and I think the council should be linking together and pressing that case to the public and trying to press demands of the Scottish Government, who can in turn press demands of the Westminster Government. But if you mean that an administration, for example, should refuse to set a budget and put itself into a legal position where it is breaking the law, then my answer would be no, I wouldn't support that. For the simple reason that I don't really believe in picking fights that I know I can't win. And I've been through this 30 years ago with the rate capping campaign in the 1980s, and the result was that despite the best attempts of a lot of extremely well-meaning people, we didn't win the battle, and we ended up more disillusioned and demoralised, and with the services in a worse state, and some of the workforce in a worse state than what we were when we went into it. So, I'm not saying that would always be my position. I'd keep it under advisement. If there was a ferment in the population where I thought the circumstances were different and we could win, maybe I'd change my view on that. But at the minute we can't, to be honest. And I think councils would be picked off one by one. Their leaders would be demonised, and legal actions would be taken against them. And ultimately, as happened in the 80s, the workforce and the community would turn against them. So I think we've got to be pretty clever about how we approach these things, I think. The European Union, I'm very much in favour of the European Union. I think it's fair to say that I think you should look at, you can always judge, I think, the position you should take in something by looking at who takes the alternative position and why. And it's true that, there are some, less and less, but there are some voices on the left, on the far left in particular, who would take the view that actually the European Union is just there as a regulatory body for capitalism, and therefore, because we don't want capitalism, there's no point in regulating it, therefore it's a nonsense. But that's less and less a view on the left these days, I think. I think most people can see the benefits of the European Union in terms of trying to apply some sort of brakes and controls to the worst excesses of capitalism, trying to build solidarity amongst people in different countries, and most particularly trying to assist the free movement of people across the continent. And that's why when you look at the most anti-European party, which is UKIP, which is really the voice not only for UKIP but for about half of the Conservative Party as well, they're against it for two main reasons. One, straightforward, because there are a bunch of racists who don't like the idea of free movement of people, and they're terrified by it in their xenophobic minds. But also because there are serious big business interests behind that who don't want any sort of regulation at all and don't think their trade should be controlled. And so when you understand those arguments, I think any rational person, or certainly somebody who is of a liberal or a democratic persuasion, would take the view that we should be in Europe and we should be working to improve it. I think a lot needs to be done, to be honest, in terms of the democratisation of the structures of the European Union. The European Parliament at the minute has got, somebody answered the phone, has got a few more powers as time's gone on, but really it still doesn't have anything like enough. And I look forward actually to the consequences of some of the political developments we've seen in recent years and are still seeing across the continent coming to fruition. It'll be interesting once the debt arguments aside, but once we see the effect of the new Greek government playing a role in the European Union, and the effect of a Podemos victory in Spain and then playing a role in the European Union, and perhaps the growth of the red-green alliances in some of the Central European continents, and the growth of organisations like the Scottish National Party in Scotland in terms of sending representatives. So I think as those filter through, you will actually see a much more exciting politics that can be conducted on a European level, and one maybe which will connect people in, because there is a problem with the whole thing seeming very remote and very far away from people's ordinary everyday lives. But I think we should engage with it and try and make it more relevant. Are we going to have a the fossil fuels.
Just briefly now.
Okay, briefly. Well, I suppose I'm pretty much on the green wing of my party, as it were. I initially came into politics through anti-nuclear campaigning and stuff. And here's the thing, right? Of course, at some stage, we need to shift away from reliance on fossil fuels, and we need to be completely reliant on renewable and sustainable energy resources. That's just a statement of fact. At some stage, okay, that's going to run out. So the real question is, as we go towards that tipping point, when are we going to change government policy so that we actually try and achieve the objective quicker and get more quickly to a position where we can be self-dependent reliant on renewable sources of energy? Or are we going to keep committing resources to get the last little dregs of fossil fuels out of the ground, no matter how expensive it is to do so, no matter how risky the technology for the environment or the water supply or anything else, which is why I'm against fracking, because I think fracking is the last gasp of the hydrocarbon big business empires that have, big oil that has been dominating the world economy for a century. I think it's their last gasp, and it's them desperately trying to hang on to control over those resources. So we might as well say to them, you're not having it, and we shift the energy to all the renewable sources, invest in them much more, and that's something I'd be fighting for if elected.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say something about the EU. As a socialist, I'm actually against the EU because some of the things that we've seen coming from the European Union has been things like privatisation programmes, austerity, and the European Central Bank and the Troika pushing through austerity in countries like Greece and Spain, basically where there's high unemployment and attacks on workers and austerity programmes being driven through. So I see it as a bosses Europe, not a Europe that stands in the interest of workers basically and the poor basically. So I don't support the European Union, and I think it's a welcome sign to see big movements like Syriza and Podemos in Spain challenging the austerity measures, and it's been a welcoming, the election of Syriza is welcoming, and I'd like to see something like that in this country too.
One more question? Over here.
I'd just like to ask the panel a question with regard to housing and social housing, and the fact that housing benefit the private sector is really just no subsidy for private landlords, and would they be in favour of a reintroduction of rent controls, which I think worked very well in the 70s?
Is there another question? Do you have a question? No, okay. Are there any?
One over here, right now.
That's it.
I'd like to ask them, do you agree that the media in the UK is far too centralised in London? What would you do to try and combat that? Because I feel that, you know, half of us in Scotland are aware that the BBC is spewing out a lot of propaganda, and half of us have our fingers in our ears. You know, what do you do to solve that?
I would say that I was going to ask the candidates if they support federalised government in the UK, and if not, what do you think the best alternative is?
Thank you very much. Right, we'll start at that end and we'll move to the left.
I feel as if I've just spoken. Federalised government. Well, I support independence for Scotland. So in that sense, I suppose, no, I don't support a federal UK. But I would say that my reasons for supporting independence are more about democratic control by people rather than any concept of nationalism, to be honest. And I think that I've always thought that we should have an independent Scotland, not to set ourselves apart from the rest of Britain, but to set an example for the rest of Britain. And I think an independent Scotland would want to work very, very closely and well with an independent England or an independent Wales or whatever, or even with regional government in England if that's what they decide to do. And there will remain, even if there's an independent Scotland, there will remain a lot of things that simply have to be administered and legislated for on an island-wide basis, if you like, particularly in terms of the environment, but in other things as well. So you know, yes, I mean, I would hope actually that, I mean, I do think actually that the independence campaign, the referendum campaign that we've fought, and it is still really just been, the pause button to me has been pressed on it rather than anything else. I think that campaign has led to a reawakening of the constitutional debate across the UK, and there are now a lot more people talking about changing the way in which they're governed. And I think as we go down to if we go down to Westminster with a large cohort, we will be making demands about the reform of the UK constitution, for example. Straight away, that we need to start scrapping the House of Lords. I mean, it's obscene that there are more. It really is obscene that there are more members of Parliament in the UK who are non-elected than there are elected. I mean, that's the fact of life. It's astonishing, and the fact that people tolerate it is beyond me. And the fact that, you know, 3 Labour governments did nothing about it is quite sad as well. So I think that debate's going to spark up actually.
Would you be against Home Rule then? You say you want more powers for Scotland?
No, I'm absolutely. Look, We took a decision on the 18th of December as a country to stay within the United Kingdom. Okay? The vote on the 7th of May isn't going to change that. It's not about independence of Scotland. It's about what do we do within the United Kingdom. And one of the things I want to see is home rule coming to Scotland. By that I mean the devolution of pretty much everything apart from foreign policy and defence, so that we have the ability, particularly in the economic sphere, to be able to do things north of the border and control our own resources. Now, in my view, that would actually lead to a situation where within a relatively short period of time, people might say, well, why don't we just go the whole hog and become an independent country? So that's, but I mean, that's, you know,
yeah, well done.
So it may do that, but it doesn't have to do that, okay? So,
If you just answer the other two bits of the question very quickly, because we're kind of running out of time here. That's okay. Okay. There was a question about housing and a question about the media.
The media, right? I mean, one of the things we should be pushing for in a new Scotland bill is devolution of broadcasting control, for example. It's absolutely ridiculous that BBC Scotland is, is controlled from Salford rather than being controlled from Glasgow or Edinburgh. So that, yes, and I mean, and I think media regulation generally is something that could be devolved. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. I was disappointed generally about the role of the media and the fact that only 1 out of 37 newspapers supported the Yes campaign. And on housing, yes, I think I would be in favour of rent controls. There's going to be a lot of it in the private sector because I think you're absolutely right that at the moment the housing benefit system is simply a means not of helping tenants or helping people who live in the houses. It's a means transferring wealth from the state to private landlords. And I think that's shocking. But to be honest with you, the main task of housing is to start house building again, and in particular to start local authority house building again on a massive scale, and high quality houses as well that people want to live in and are going to last more than 25 years before they fall down.
I'm glad to see that Tommy obviously supports my call for the Scottish Government to use its borrowing powers now to increase house building in Scotland. And I was really disappointed it wasn't in the Scottish Government's budget this year, because it could easily have doubled or tripled the amount it spent. Obviously, building affordable, and by that I mean proper low-rent housing, not some of the things that are called low-rent, affordable at the moment, is absolutely crucial, because we have to make that switch back. 40 years ago, out of every £20 that government spent on housing, £16 went on creating affordable housing, and £4 went on subsidising rents. Out of every £20 the government spends now, £19 goes on housing benefit, and only £1 goes on building homes. With a huge switch to subsidising people from sort of, if you like, subsidising bricks and mortar, and as a result we've seen over many years. I think you have to have a really hard plan to make sure that happens, and that includes our policy would be to cap rent increases. It would be to be building, and it would be to be ensuring that as a result of that housing benefit spend starts to come down, because that's the one part, or one of the parts of social security spending, which I do want to see reducing, because it is not going for a useful purpose. It's going for is going to private landlords, as I think everybody has said. On the BBC. I'm probably different from you. I don't see the complete bias that other people see, and that's it doesn't. Well, you have to understand that not everybody agrees on that point. Should we have devolution of our media to a large extent? Yes, I'm quite happy to see that happen. Now, in terms of the kind of government we're going to have UK-wide, I do think that, personally, I think a federal solution would be ultimately the best one. I'm glad, actually, that some of the interest that's now coming from parts of England for perhaps the first time in 20 or 30 years is actually a good thing, because part of the problem has been it's been a very asymmetric devolutionary process. We had the creation of the Scottish Parliament, we've got the Northern Ireland Assembly, although it's in a slightly different, different political context. Not always, it's quite fragile for different reasons. You've got the Welsh Assembly, and then we have a very large country. Do we want an English Parliament as part of a federal government? Do we want regional parliaments? To give credit to the last Labour government, having set up the Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Parliament, the next phase was to look at regionalisation in England. It got bogged down in all sorts of debates about how much it would cost, and then they had a referendum in the North East of England and they voted it down, put the whole thing onto the back burner. Actually, I wonder if they did it now. I suspect the different government might be at a different outcome. And my preference would be for that. I don't support the suggestion that the only way forward is to go for what I suppose could be described as sort of full fiscal autonomy. I think there's a financial black hole in the middle of that, and I'm not sure we've got time to go into that tonight, but it's one of the big reasons why I supported the campaign for a no vote. I think the people of Scotland, the people of the UK, are better off as one country, and I think that full fiscal autonomy would leave us, particularly at the moment, but even over a longer period, in a difficult position where we wouldn't be able to do all these things. It's one thing to want to wish them into existence, and that's why I think we should stay as part of the United Kingdom, but from a personal point of view, preferably in the federal system.
No chance. No chance.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to let the other candidates answer the questions now because we're running very late now.
So starting off with housing, we would strengthen tenants' rights in housing. We would also be thinking about house building and thinking of different models of house building, like cooperatives and buying houses, the local authority being empowered to buy houses in the open market so that they don't all have to be built in Greenbelt, and that we can really be thinking about increasing the housing stock and good quality housing stock, so energy efficient, and with things like, simple things like drying greens. Why have so many houses not got drying greens? And yet we know asthma gets increased by people having wet clothes, making their housing wet. So good quality homes, and also thinking about how do we repair the housing stock that we have at the moment, because some of it's atrocious. It's really badly insulated, it's not really fit for purpose anymore. We need to really look at that and repair stock as well. Media centralisation, don't agree with Sheila. I think that we have a problem that's the same problem as the government. The establishment is so ingrained it doesn't know it's the establishment. It doesn't know that it's talking down to us because it hasn't any idea that we are different. And I think that it's a whole attitude of centralism that we really need to tackle, and by changing the government we will tackle that, I think. So I think changing it more radically would address that, because they're going to have to take it more seriously. But how do we also address the establishment? Because Scotland has its own establishment as well, and it's got centralist ideas, and the media in Scotland isn't as free and as fair as we would like. So I think it's a big question. I also think that it's great that we've got social media and things that are changing, because people could hear about the lies that other people tell, and they hear about it on Facebook. And Democracy TV, of course, sorry, I was thinking of that. And obviously the Green Party was a yes for independence, and I voted yes and campaigned for yes, and I think that we, along with Tommy, we accept that that was a no from the people of Scotland, and we still need more powers for Scotland. And we need to make use of the powers we've got, but we also need to be able to really deal with welfare, which we can't do at the moment.
First, I'd like to deal with the housing question. I think it's disgraceful what's happened to our council housing, how Thatcher and the government since then have privatised housing, basically, and one of the legacies of this is housing associations that act like private landlords almost, because I'll tell you this, I've got a story. My neighbour was left without a boiler and any heating for over a month, and she was 6 months pregnant with her daughter who's 5, and it was the both of them are asthmatic, and we had to campaign in our square to get her boiler fixed because the housing association was refusing to do that and acting like a private landlord, basically. So I'm actually for a proper house building programme, proper tenants' rights, a control on rents, and an end to private landlords, basically, and also denationalisation of the housing stock, basically, and The other question was the media. Well, one of the things I'd love to see is like what happened in Greece, where they took over the TV station, basically started running it themselves. The real voice, democracy from below, basically, and also support the National Union of Journalists, which campaign to have control by ordinary people and the people that work there of the media, basically, because I do believe the BBC is biased, especially if it's coverage of things like anything that goes on out within the mainstream, or things like Palestinians and stuff like that, or of war and stuff like that. And I actually believe that workers' committees should run the media, and people who live ordinary lives should have control over what they see on their televisions, basically. And in terms of yes, I also campaigned for the Yes campaign in the referendum. I am for the breakup of the UK because I believe it's imperialist, and we're mired in wars, poverty and austerity, and I would like to see the House of Lords abolished too, and ultimately I'd like to see power in the hands of ordinary people and trade unions that can organise society and interests of the working class and the poor, and get rid of the type of society that we live in that's in the interests of the 1% at the top, not the 99% of the people at the bottom.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the candidates very much indeed for your contributions, and also thank you to the audience for coming along and participating. As you know, this meeting was organised by Radical Scotland, which you might have told from the poster up there. Some of you might know better as the Radical Independence Campaign. We kind of, if you like, badged ourselves as Radical Scotland because we feel that encouraging the democratic process, which is something very much that I think people did start to engage with more during the referendum last year, and organisations like RIGS were very involved in encouraging people to do that, not only RIGS, and encouraging people on both sides of the debate. And something that we feel strongly about is continuing to encourage that democratic debate. And so we felt it was important to organise meetings like this, which didn't only appeal to people who voted yes in the referendum or might vote yes if there were another one tomorrow or whatever, because it's important that everybody gets a chance to join in. So having said that, we do campaign, of course, on a radical agenda, the clue's in the name. If anybody's interested in our ideas, that are summed up incredibly briefly in the leaflets on the chairs, Pat here has a sign-up sheet, and if you're interested in coming along to the meeting or getting our emails or hearing a bit more about us, please see Pat at the end. Also, if you would like to make a contribution and it's not compulsory to the cost of running tonight, Ian has a button, which is very good at rattling. Feel free to put something in it or not, as you choose. We've got another couple of question times coming up. One that we're organising in conjunction with Commonweal on Friday the 24th of April, so in Edinburgh South. So if you've got friends, colleagues, I was going to say neighbours, but not on this occasion neighbours, who live in Edinburgh South, you might want to encourage them to come along to that. And we've also got kind of general hustings, at least I hope we have, on Monday the 27th of April, which will be in Augustine's United Church, which will be